This part of the recording now will be Colonel Lang telling about the rebuilding of the Abbey at Monte Cassino.
The Abbey at Monte Cassino was rebuilt in the early 1960s, and I had the good fortune to see it in somewhere between 1965-67. It's the only church structure I know of that has been rebuilt as much as the original. When the 194th Field Artillery first saw the Abbey after the capture of Mount Crocio, Mount Porcio, we looked out and in the distance saw a blue dome. That blue dome is not there at this time. It may be that the patina on the cupola has not yet aged to the stage where it is blue. The Abbey itself is in a commanding position geologically, militarily, and that is the reason it became a structure that happened to be used as an impediment on our move from the south to the north. Going in history, there originally was a tower built to try and restrain the Romans. That tower was occupied by St. Benedict somewhere in the 5th century and is the foundation for the Abbey. Other construction occurred later. The final Abbey was built somewhere in the 900, 904, 910 because the bronze doors on the church were cast in Constantinople in 999 or 910 because the technology for casting large bronze pieces at that time was not available anywhere in Italy. The structure is magnificent. Part of what I was told was by a man who worked on some of the related details. He told me that the plans for the original Abbey were located in the Vatican Library on vellum, which is a sheepskin that has been treated. They were copied in the Vatican with the reproduction center. Actually, the reproduction services cost something like $1,100 or so, and were used to prepare the construction drawings for the rebuilding. There have been complaints that the Americans destroyed the Abbey and they paid nothing for its rebuilding. For obvious reasons, it would be impossible for the American government, with the basis of church and state, to have made a direct contribution. The Italian government, as a result of Garibaldi's victories in uniting Italy, is the owner of the Abbey de Monte Cassino. The Abbey was to be considered destroying it or selling it off when the Prime Minister of Great Britain in the 1860s and 70s, that's Prime Minister Gladstone, wrote to Garibaldi and persuaded him to retain the Abbey because of its special role in maintaining the knowledge of Western civilization in its libraries, and these were saved. The structure, as I stands as it was originally, except where age has not been able to affect it. I had the good fortune of making a visit at a time I wasn't sure I would be there, and I asked to speak to one of the monks who was present at the time of the bombing in February 15th, 1944. This turned out to be Father Augustine, who had been in the monastery for 43 years. He did speak English, and he showed me the room he had that looked out on the area where we were later serving in the material described by Margaret Bork White in her book, The Purple Heart. They called it Purple Heart Valley. I, at the time of the bombing, was in the tower at the church in Cervaro, Cervaro, and with some of the 2,000-pound bombs landing close by, we weren't quite sure who was going to be hit. This was at the time that General Joanne, who commanded the French Corps in Banafro, sent a message saying, we have the Poles to our right, the Germans to our front, the British to our left, and the Americans are bombing us. To whom should I surrender? And we were uncertain. It's rather difficult to see these clusters of bombs coming down towards you whenever whoever was serving as a bombardier didn't recognize the right target. The church, the monastery itself, was destroyed. In the rebuilding, after it was rebuilt, I had a tour, and of course the tour did not include what was no longer there to see. One of the more interesting parts, in speaking with Father Augustine, was to be told that these are the tombs of Saint Benedict and of his sister, Saint Scholastica, who had founded a nunnery in the town of Cassino. And then Father Augustine, who in the vernacular of the Benedictines is described as Dom, D-O-M, Augustine, was a monk of the Benedictine order, or it would be Dom, is also used with the Carthusian monks. He said these are the two tombs, and he added that after the bombing we found bones, and he said we brought in physical anthropologists and said these are bones of a male, and these are bones of a female, and we buried them in these tombs. Our archives from the 7th century describe the original burial, and they remained undisturbed until the 20th century, and we assume that they are the same one. To me, this was an interesting bit of history. I looked at the bronze doors because in the repair there is one panel that has been added to the originals showing the bombing in the 20th century. The diary of one of the monks has been translated into English and published in a book put out in the 1982, 3, or maybe even 4, with the name Hapgood, H-A-P-G-O-O-D, and then this mentions Dom Agostino, who is the Father Augustine I happen to see. In considering the location, the geologic background of the area is important because with the wearing away by the river on the side, you have a structure that could be used for defense. Whether the monastery needed to be destroyed is still a matter of discussion. There are some interesting treatments in an earlier book by Majdalany, M-A-J-D-A-L-A-N-Y, who was with a British officer with the 78th Division, and in it he tells of the questions that were raised as to whether it was actually used by the Germans as a defensive position. I was surprised to find that he gives no reference to 2 senior commanders whose names aren't listed because the British didn't think they had gone to actually see on the ground what was there. One of these books brings out that Rome was taken from the south on only 2 occasions, and it mentions that an Italian princess told General Clark, the commander of the 5th Army, that the first was by a barbarian, Count Belisarius of the Byzantine Empire, and the second was by the 5th Army. That Hannibal himself had commented on the difficulty of taking Rome from the south. He used elephants along with his other forces to come in and try to take Rome from the north. I think these are all factors that should be considered. I don't believe the monastery could have ever been rebuilt if it hadn't been owned by the Italian government, where it was treated as a public works project of importance to the state. Tell me when to start.
This portion of the tape is Colonel Lang talking about Colonel Cook.
I first met Colonel Cook when I joined the 15th Brigade at Fort Bragg, and Colonel Cook was in command of the 194th Field Artillery Group. I learned in time that he had been an engineer with the Arizona Highway Department prior to World War I, may have been with the Arizona National Guard, and became an officer in command of a battery during World War I. I'm not certain of the unit of which he served. After the war, there was an integration of officers who were interested in remaining as a part of the regular army. Colonel Cook applied, was accepted, and he continued as a captain during the rest of his service. It's important to recognize conditions that developed during the peacetime period between the two world wars, whereby an officer in the regular service would enter as a second lieutenant, could be promoted to a first lieutenant after 3 years, but would not reach the grade of captain, because there were no vacancies, until after 17 years of service. Colonel Cook had acquired a reputation and experience as a standing artillery officer with troops through service, which included a period at the at Fort Myer, Virginia, in support of the Arlington National Cemetery. I don't know whether he commanded the White Horse Troop or the Black Horse Battery. He also won the Knox Trophy Battery in 1933. This was a trophy presented originally by Secretary of War Knox to be awarded each year to the best battery in all of the United States Army. And it included firing, it included field exercises, it included the normal performance during the year as a whole. This was important later because of the respect accorded to Colonel John C. Cook's ideas on the matter of field artillery service. As I mentioned, I met him for the first time when we were assigned to Fort Bragg. I had been transferred from the 228th Field Artillery Group to the 15th Field Artillery Brigade. The 194th Field Artillery was preparing for what was then known as the GHQ tests. Colonel Cook had insisted that the tests be deferred for a period of time sufficient for the training to give the troops an opportunity to actually pass, and pass with a commendable record. I was surprised that this request was granted, because it had been denied to so many others, but later came to understand the reason why. That if he considered more training time was needed, it would be given. The regiment had received, the group, had received its 8-inch howitzers. We had no ammunition to fire the howitzers, and we were conducting exercises that were normal with the period of time at Fort Bragg. Major John Doran, D-O-R-A-N, who I had known in my earlier service in Pittsburgh, was the S4 of the 15th Brigade, and he managed to obtain 280-odd 8-inch howitzer shells for a weapon used during World War I. They were of a different configuration than in the ammunition designed for the 8-inch howitzer which we had, but were chambered that they actually could be fired. There were no firing tables and no other records that could be used, but we on the staff were permitted by Colonel Cook to go and develop a firing exercise that provided superb training to locate and record the landing of the shells. With Captain Paul Wilson, we developed graphic firing tables, and by using a system of successive approximations, improved our firing to the point where we knew where each shell landed, could develop a firing table, and allow all of the batteries to at least fire a few rounds. This, I think, was vital to us in establishing the capability of shooting where we knew where the shells were going to land and being able to have the whole system work. We also carried on a set of exercise, permitted the unit to go through one operation, one location, one firing, and then take time to discuss errors and deficiencies, and permit this to go down to the sergeants in the sections, and then run through the same exercise on the same ground and repeat it, and find that the flaws had actually been recognized and corrected. Colonel Cook understood the training manuals that we used for field artillery fire, which were about 1 inch thick, and used mathematics that, although it was simplified, was beyond what was ordinarily taught to those who went to regular schooling, and we were able to produce performance that did come to play a major role later. In a personal sense, I considered Colonel Cook to be quite taciturn. I came to know him more. I was transferred to the 194th and functioned as the S3 through the exercises which we had, and then later was promoted to the executive. At the time we had finished our test and passed them satisfactorily, and were due to received overseas assignments which were to take us to North Africa and to Italy. When we shipped out, I had a discussion with Colonel Cook, and he outlined his thinking with regard to staffing. He said the best of his officers, that's Colonel Colwell and Colonel Douglas, had been placed in command of battalions because with a group arrangement, the battalions were due to be moved around, and they needed to be in the charge of officers who knew what warfare was like, who would be able to look out for the men and for the organizations and see that they were given the attention that was needed. And he was going to take a chance on his own staff by having younger officers, myself and Major Frank, and be able to function in the group headquarters. We traveled to Fort Dix and shipped out of the Port of New York. En route turned out to be Oran. We were able to follow some of the convoy location in terms of latitude by reading the latitude of the North Star, but really did not know where we were going until we passed through Gibraltar. At Oran, we unloaded and found ourselves in a bivouac area outside near Ain el Turk, and eventually had to travel across the highway to Ferryville and Bizerte and near Tunis. This road took us on a pathway that was on the edge of the Sahara Desert, and there were times when we saw camels as well as not. They instead of shipping out promptly to Italy, we found instead that the British 13th Corps was unable to be shipped out in another area, so they had to take priority, and we used the time for some additional training. The training included machine gun firing, an effort, after hearing the 1st Division say that all of the German troops captured automatically quoted the Geneva Convention when we didn't even know where to find with the Geneva Convention. I asked the Mediterranean-based section judge advocate where it would be located in our military literature, and he said that in the rules of land warfare, but he wanted to know why we wanted this information. And his question was a good indication of the lack of coverage that had been given to American troops prior to that time. We sailed to Italy, and prior to was discussing with British officers about his opinion of the American arrangements. He said, "I don't understand you people." This British Navy officer said, "We wouldn't put an officer with the preparation of your people in command of a rowboat, and you put them in command of a ship." And I must say, they ordinarily manage in some way and survive. We landed in Italy at Bagnoli, and Colonel Cook adjusted our operational procedures in a different way than was outlined in the text that had been studied. In the group headquarters, ordinarily the executive officer would be seeing to administrative details in the area. Instead, we needed an arrangement whereby someone would be visiting other areas and operations and finding where the enemy happened to be located when there was a question. And this was a feature I covered. Major Robert Frank, as the S3, took care of the CP coordinating operations. We went into combat under the 2nd Corps and put into position during darkness at night and withheld fire until there could be the 8-inch howitzers would be discovered as something a bit unusual and never been available before. An assistant artillery officer in the 5th Army, who I had known at Fort Sill in 1940, said there had been doubt in the headquarters as to whether the 8-inch howitzers would be useful. The 176 field artillery gun, 176 millimeter gun, Long Tom, had been used on as independent batteries in support of operations in North Africa, and it was a question as to whether they had been very effective for what was involved, and there were very real doubts as to whether the 8-inch howitzer should be used. We fired and gradually worked out improved conditions as we went along until we were in position at Cassino. There, I think the best record of the respect we were held in was in Majdaligny's, found in Majdaligny's book called The Monastery, in which he discusses the accuracy of the 8-inch howitzer units the difference in the outlook of the American troops and the Britishers, they called the 8-inch howitzer Horace. He visited one of the battalions of the 194th and found that stenciled on the tube there was a term, the belching bitch. And this obviously had to be, this was B Battery of the 995th Battalion. Colonel Cook managed us from an observation post that was unusually located, and where the mess line happens to be the only one on 2 pages of photographs by Margaret Bork White called it Purple Heart Valley. We fired a tremendous amount of ammunition at the Abbey de Monte Cassino. We had to, for the final attack in May, we had to turn our 1 or 2 batteries around so they would fire on the side hill cut of the only road leading that Germans had to take in leaving Esperia, E-S-P-E-R-I-A, for Pico. And the devastation in terms of dead animals, troops, shattered artillery pieces, and other transport was ghastly. It's something worse than I have ever seen. I think one item of special interest in connection with the casino location was Colonel Cook's action on May the 8th, 1944. In the morning of May the 8th, he told me I had to represent him at a luncheon with Lieutenant General Miles Dempsey, who commanded the British 13th Corps. He didn't know what General Dempsey wanted, but he had a message. Colonel Cook had a message saying that General Clark would visit, as the commander of 5th Army, would visit at noon that day, the same day, and he was unable to be at both places. So the luncheon with General Dempsey is not mentioned in our records. The visit of General Clark is included. It might be interesting at this time to mention that the luncheon was an experience for me. I was seated between General Dempsey, to the left of General Dempsey, and to the right of the artillery officer of the British 13th Corps, Brigadier Good. The general was gracious. He had a senior British officer visiting who was seated at his right. And when the luncheon ended, Brigadier Good said the general is uncertain whether the French, under whose operational control we were at the time, were going to tell us about the time of the attack on Casino. Did I know the time? And I said no. He said, well, the general was doubtful, and he wanted to take positive steps to be sure that you were informed and would be able to act accordingly. The final attack will occur at 100 hours on the night of 11 May, 1944. This was 3 days before that time. When I returned and reported to Colonel Cook, I told him about the luncheon, the speech, and General Dempsey's concern, and had left his thanks. And he looked as if he were a bit disturbed, and I learned the reason why later. But I also asked whether he knew the time of attack, and he said no, he did not. I considered it inappropriate for me to ask what he and the Army commander had discussed, because that was for him to say. Better cut it off for a moment. Sometime later, after the war, I asked Colonel Cook what General Clark had discussed with him and during this meeting, and he responded that Clark had asked whether we were having any trouble with the British and the French, and his response had been that no, we did not. We were getting along just fine. He said, "You don't have any problems and you're getting along?" He said, "Yes." And this, as if General Clark had not believed that he really meant what he said. He asked, "Would you want me to move you to Anzio?" And he said, "No, there's no reason to. We are getting along." Now, I must read this, and at the same time, I remember him saying he did not know at that time. Colonel Cook did not know at that time that the time had been set for the attack on Cassino on 2300. We knew that there was an attack coming at some time. We had to shift battery locations and fields of fire, but that was in a general sense, and the attack could have been a week or two later without knowing any different. As we proceeded, we managed to go over. The record shows that we followed the French troops. We passed through Rome. We went to the north, and we were in support of the French troops in an area that was very open, where we could be shelled at times by the Germans. We would go into a position, and one location was one outside of an area where we were waiting to go through the town of Ceccano, Ceccano. I had been out on a visit and found that the Germans were still occupying and were shooting from Ceccano, and returned to report to Colonel Cook that we couldn't move. And he said, "I have this message here from the Army which says, we hold Ceccano and you are in support of the French and you're to move." And with what I had told him, my response was that we can't, the Germans are there. He decided this was one of the places where he, as the commander, had to go forward and see for himself. After all, General Lucas, a lieutenant general, had been relieved. There had been an American major general, and if I had either been wrong or conditions had changed, it would have been Colonel Cook's, who would have been held responsible for failure to act, and therefore he had to go and see for himself. He did. So Colonel Cook got in his Jeep with Fitch, and when he returned, I asked, were the Germans there? And he had a somewhat sheepish grin and said, "Well, we were shot at, and the Fitch managed. Had one shell end in front of us, one bracketed, one behind us, and Fitch managed to get us through." And Fitch later told me that what he did was go down a hill and swing off to the side in a grove of trees, so there was shelling that we were unaffected. And then he said we swung around and gunned our way up and came back. Colonel Cook added, though, at the time that Fitch stopped in front of the first, where he was told, in front of the first French officer, and Colonel Cook in French asked him why he left me go through, and the French officer remarked, "If you had been French, I would have stopped you." But he said, a crazy American can go anywhere he wants, and this was pretty well what we had to do when we were serving the French. We did wait, and as soon as Ceccano was clear, we moved, but we did have to take some punishment because we were in range and going along the side of the river and to our next position. We were also running out of ammunition, and a sergeant took a group of trucks, may have been 6 or 10, and started back for the ammunition reloading point. found that there was no ammunition, no 8-inch howitzer ammunition at that location, and was told by the ordnance people that there might be some in the at the location in the 6th Corps area. The 6th Corps operational order said there should be no troops or vehicles from other outside units in their area. So the MP stopped the sergeant in charge. We later received a correspondence through the Army saying that the sergeant had been disregarded the orders of the MPs, had used language that was inappropriate, and we were to report back with a separate copy for the Provost Marshal of the 6th Corps along the coast. This was the kind of problem where a unit operating like the 194th Group had to be sure that its people had the flexibility to operate and knew that they would be supported. We remarked that the sergeant ought to be commended for his initiative in trying to obtain ammunition that was needed, and that we thought it was inappropriate to carry on any order any punishment. Colonel Cook signed a response. It came back again saying that there was no question the sergeant should be disciplined, and Colonel Cook would approve signing his name with a special request that this be brought to the personal attention of Major General John Cam, the artillery officer of the 5th Army. He did so. Our next reply from the 5th Army said that through the Chief of Staff, and it included instructions for the Ordnance Officer and the Transportation Officer to report why the ammunition point did not have the ammunition that was needed for our ability to function. We at least had taken care of our troops. We may not have gone far enough to let them know orally that they had this support. We continued on, and elsewhere I think people know that we went into bivouac. Colonel Cook was in charge, and then we were pulled out to provide artillery support, strong artillery support for the hodgepodge collection of troops that were going in defense of Pisa. These were, for the largest part, anti-aircraft artillerymen, British and American, who were put into the lines as infantry because they weren't needed as they had been before. They were backed up by the 100th Battalion of Nisei's, largely from Hawaii, and I did meet them at times. We did succeed, and one of the interesting asides might be a visit to our headquarters by the anti-aircraft artillery officer of the 5th Army, who was invited to stay for dinner, and we wanted to know what was going on at the Army and why he was there. And he said he had been charged with looking at Pisa. The troops were complaining that the Germans were using the Leaning Tower as an OP, and they wanted it, the area that was under the no-fire regime, destroyed. We told them that the Germans had brought some batteries down just to the north limit of the area around the cathedral and the Leaning Tower, the baptistry, and that Colonel Cook himself had gone to direct fire from a distance, moving down with our 8-inch howitzers just as close as we could, so that we'd hit the German artillery without violating our instructions not to shoot inside this area. The anti-aircraft artillery officer, and I think his name was Lieutenant Colonel Cassidy, said that he would recommend to the General Clark that absolutely should not hit just the area around, including the cathedral and the Leaning Tower, because there were far better vantage points in the hands of the German, and if there were to be any destruction, it should include the entire city rather than just this small area, which of course would have caused a public outcry. We finished our service in that area and then moved back to the Naples region, where we took care of equipment and were shipped out for the invasion for southern France. The port of Leghorn, which was much nearer to Pisa, was not usable by the heavy equipment, and it was for this reason we were sent south. Now, this covers our Italian part of the campaign. There are letters in the records that discuss it. After landing in southern France, we had some delays outside and then moved north, as I recall, through Lyon and till we joined the 15th Corps. The 15th Corps had originally come from Paris, taken Paris, from Normandy down to Paris, and was in position. It was commanded by General Wade Hayslip. The artillery officer was Brigadier General Edward Stanley Ott. General Ott had been accompanied by Colonel Frank Dodd, who was the assistant artillery officer of the 7th Army, when we were in positions, and the 194th Field Artillery Battalion had a battery on the rear shoulder of Mount Porcia, fronting Cassino, just off Highway 6. At the time of the visit of these two officers, a battery received German counter battery worse than any encountered at any time during our World War II service. There were times when some of the troops some of the sections had to be taken out of action, and where we had lost substantial losses in the battery, where parts of the bodies of some of the men had to be pulled out of trees after action. It made a major impression on General Ott because the organization, the group, the battalion, the battery were still able to fight, and they were responding, and those who could reach the German units responsible had been fighting them. When we reported, General Ott gave Colonel Cook instructions that he wanted to be informed of a number of things. He said, first of all, we have never encountered a German mastery of mass fire. He said they're not able to mass all of their artillery on one location with any degree of accuracy. We haven't had it at Normandy, we haven't had it anywhere since. And if you ever encounter that, I need to know about it immediately, because the threat to us is far worse than it would have been before. The second was that if you ever have counter batteries such as I observed on my visit, I want to know about it regardless of the time of day or where I am. We have not had that in Normandy or anywhere through France. He may have had one or two other points which I've forgotten. Then he turned to Colonel Cook and said, I do, that you may have thought about from your service that we may have missed. One of those items was that Colonel Cook said, get squad tents, get straw, get stoves for the men at each gun position, because if you do not, your troops won't be able to sleep, they won't be able to respond promptly to fire missions, and they'll be sick in the winter. And this was one matter that General Ott carried out, and I'm sure carried on to others. We were in position in an area where the groundwater table was high enough that the people wore wooden shoes, and where where there had been fighting in World War I. The forests hadn't even regrown. We continued on and probably went into the Bose Mountains, the Bose campaign, went into Bischofsweiler, and after it was occupied, there was the local people turned out along the curb as some of the units went by, and the thing I remember is that the young girls were wearing their local costumes with either big green bows and lots of lace on their dresses, and another group had large red hats and red dresses. I discovered afterwards that the girls with the green bows were Protestants, and the ones with the red dresses and the red hats were Catholics. We moved on and were supporting 15th Corps and the 2nd French Armored Division. On the morning of Thanksgiving Day, 1944, we were in this French farmhouse. I went to see Colonel Cook, and he had gotten up, but one side of his lip was down, and he was drooling a bit. He was sleepy. He said we had a message that the French armored column had gone into Strasbourg and captured the city during the night. He told, we were going to breakfast, and he told me I was to go out and try to get into Strasbourg, and then report back and put his head down on the. I think we went to breakfast. He came back. He put his head down on the field desk and went to sleep again. It was only later that we discovered that he had had a stroke, and this was bound to affect him, although we tried to see that he was able to continue to function, particularly if it were able to go away. I went out and went on the road to the head of a French column, which was armored column, which was shooting at the hillside and was returning German fire. It was impossible to get into Strasbourg, so with that I returned and reported that we couldn't get there. It would need an armored column to get through. The medical officers gave Colonel Cook attention. We tried to see that he was able to function to the extent possible, but Colonel Lakey, the executive officer of the 15th Corps Artillery, happened to come by and visit and saw him as we were trying to move, and this is where he reported he had to go to a hospital, and of course then the 15th Corps made some replacements. Colonel Cook thought of leaving his unit because he feared he would not have a chance that he would be retired, and I don't believe he actually accepted the thought of retirement until about 2 years later, when he was finally released from different hospitals and from the medical service. We occupied several positions in this area, and of course the Germans then reinforced, and you later had what was called the Colmar salient, with major battles in Hagenau and Colmar. When the Battle of the Bulge occurred later, the 15th Corps was moved to the north, and a skeleton force was left in the positions they had been holding. The 194th Field Artillery Group, which no longer had Colonel Cook in command, but was known, accepted by General Lott as being a rather capable organization, was left to function as the Corps Artillery headquarters, and we did so, extending ourselves very much just as had been done previously in the casino area, where the volume of wire was at a level that was totally unexpected in any of the training or any thoughts given to a group headquarters organization. we held this position until the 6th Corps moved up from the south, and Brigadier General Bair and the 194th Field Artillery Battalion, Colonel Caldwell and company, came up and moved in and took over from us. General Bair was talking with Major Frank and I. He said, we don't have anybody who would have been able to take over this position and function in this period. And that, of course, appreciated hearing it. It was the kind of recognition for the experience we had had and performance we had had in Italy at Cassino. We then moved and rejoined the 15th Corps, which had moved off a bit to the north and I think back off from the upper edge of the Vosges Mountains. Colonel Cook was returned to the United States. Fortunately for him, the stroke evidently dissolved so that his brain was unaffected, and he walked, his speech recovered, and it was not slurred. And I saw him from time to time when I had an opportunity to go through Santa Cruz, California, where he bought a house and where I saw the picture of the Knox Trophy Battery. He was active in local activities, and later although I did not see him when he was in a nursing home in Santa Cruz, Northern California, I did speak with him on the telephone. I did not know at the time of his death, I was not notified that he had died. He was buried with appropriate honors at Fort Ord and given very marked recognition. Mrs. Cook lived in the house for a while, and then I have lost contact. I believe an item that may have fitted earlier here should be applied to Colonel Cook. Was the time of the French-Moroccan forces, the French Expeditionary Corps, leaving command in the area near Siena. This was in Italy. General Juin, Juin, had been the Corps commander. I was not present at the ceremony where he recognized the 194th, but the group was assembled and the representatives of the battalions, you had Colonel Cook, Colonel Caldwell, Colonel Douglas, and other battalion commanders. I was out reconnoitering some other area, but General Juin came over and saw this older officer, and I draw on Kenneth Haig's recollection, who was there, and went over and spoke with him for Kenneth what?
Was it Colonel
Cook? But General Juin talked with him for 5 minutes or 10 minutes.
Quite a while.
And he, of course, gave perfunctory recognition to the others. The reason for giving the Croix de Guerre to the officers was that he was leaving to become the Chief of Staff of the French Army, and as such, he would no longer have jurisdiction. He was giving the highest ranking medal he could award as a French Corps commander, and he gave a citation to the 194th Field Artillery Group and its units. That citation, with two such citations, the unit would be entitled to wear the fourragère and would have received an award. But General Juin wrote in a volume I saw in French. I can't read French, but after his service as Chief of Staff, it was tremendously well done, and this would be the equivalent of a General Marshal as far as France was concerned. And but I do want to comment that General Juin had been impressed by Colonel Cook and recognized us with the personal attention he gave at the ceremony.